Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the album wrap episode of Season 9 of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown, joined as always on these episodes by my pal and co-host, even though he's a Liverpool supporter, John Paulsen. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Today, we're looking at the Heartbreakers' 1991 album, Into the Great Wide Open. How are you doing, Paul? John, Jesus, I got you. I started with your last name there. Well, John Paul, you could be a Pope.
It only happens 15 times a year. I have one of those names where people call me Paul Johnson fairly regularly. Anybody like new that I meet or a contractor that's coming to the house or something, Paul Johnson is common. Awesome. It's nice to be here. It's always a highlight to do these album wrap episodes with you. And you alluded to the Liverpool support. You're a Man United fan, so they're rivals, but it's been good talking with you about football in addition to Petty over our Twitter DMs and bonding that way, I guess, reverse bonding, giving each other ribbing each other, giving each other shit.
Of course, yeah.
And this is a special album to me too. This was the first tour that I went to, was after this album came out. And if you think about Tom's discography at this point in his career, the number of great songs that he could mine for a set list, seeing him for the first time, there's a giant tree on stage, which they used to great effect for the Don't Come Around Here No More segment. I was doing a little bit of research, and there's a Take the Highway, I believe it's called, concert film, which it's out of print. It was released on Laserdisc and VHS. So you can still find the VHS, I think, and the Laserdisc, if you have a Laserdisc player. I don't know anybody who has one personally, but it is also available on YouTube, and it's kind of grainy, and the sound seems pretty good, but I definitely recommend people, search that up and watch that concert, because it was definitely a great introduction to him and the band live, and just the span of his discography at that time just led to a really epic concert, and I was just completely hooked at that point as a fan.
Well, because you say, like, with the next album that gets released is Greatest Hits, so you've got a Greatest Hits tour already there, and not to mention like the back half of his career, which, depending on how you look at it, could be even better. So whereabouts did you see that show?
That was at it was at Marcus Amphitheater at the time. I thought it was during Summerfest, but I was looking at the date. It was actually in September, the Summerfest ground. So Milwaukee, Wisconsin has this, it used to be a 10-day fest called Summerfest. And they have a big amphitheater down there by the lakefront. And that's actually the last concert I saw him as well in 2017 was at Summerfest. So it was at the same place where I saw him the first time, just a different time of the year. September was a good time to see him. It wasn't too hot or anything like that, and I just remember the crowd. I was sitting in the sort of the second section of the amphitheater in the center, and I just remember the crowd just loved him. I mean, it's just at that point, especially, like, he, after Full Moon Fever and now Into the Great Wide Open with Learning to Fly in the radio, everybody was excited to see him there.
So that's one of those, when you've had Full Moon Fever, now you've got a lot of Greatest Hits fans coming as well now, right? So now you've got not just the Petty heads, not just the guys who've been with Tom Petty for a long time, but all these people who the radio hit fans. And so that's when an artist's set list can tend to change, right? Where you don't get quite as many deep cuts. So I was looking on setlist.fm, and they don't have the set list for the September 7th show at the Marcus Amphitheater.
I was looking for that as well. I ended up looking at their their average set list to kind of come up with some, and then looking at some of the set lists around that date to sort of try to piece together what he might have played at that show. But I recognize a lot of those songs. I remember for a lot of those songs from my experience there.
Yeah. And what a set list too, right? I mean, it's a long one too. And like you said, that stage production, probably the biggest sort of stage production they ever did was on that tour, right? With the tree and all the sort of the props and the presidents coming running around, that kind of stuff. So it's a very, very cool tour. And man, like, they did quite a few songs from the album. Just looking, they 7 songs from the album around that time.
6 or 7, depending on the show. And we'll get into it, but most of them really worked well, and one of them that's sort of absent, which is surprising based on what he said, talked about. We could talk about a little bit later, but
Yep.
there's some exclusions that were kind of surprising based on what Tom thought of certain songs in the album.
It was recorded between 1991 and again they kind of they've got Rumbo Studio in Canoga Park, California, and then again Mike Campbell's studio is his garage studio. And I think there's one song that again we'll get to it later, that I'm pretty sure I would be willing to guess that was recorded at Mike's garage because there's a specific feel to it that I think, yeah, that sounds like a late night. We're mixing, let's go down to the garage and let's record some stuff here. So, but there were
It's
five.
crazy that they're able to, and I understand from studio to studio, maybe a studio has a specific sound, but to be able to record in your garage and then also record at another studio, Sound City or something, and have them sound the same,
Yeah,
or fit together is kind of amazing to me. But I'm not deep in the weeds on the recording process.
but well, what'll happen quite often too is it'll be, on Full Moon Fever, I can't remember which track it is, but they got someone who played drums. Was it Kelton who plays drums on one of the tracks? Can't remember. So, that's just proximity. Well, he's not going to come over to here. He's in LA. He's at that studio. Let's just go and use him there. Everything's mic'd up anyway. Or they're looking for a specific, they want the guitar, with these guys at Jeff Lynne's level. Well, I want the guitar to sound very specifically this way. So let's go do it in this room because I know that I can get that sound there. So quite often that's what it is. Or they'll just mix things in different studios. So sometimes when you see the studio, it might have been recorded in one studio, but just mixed in a different one. And if it's not differentiated, it could just be that too, which is pretty cool. But 5 singles from this album, only 2 released in the US, Learning to Fly and Into the Great Wide Open. But Too Good to Be True was released in UK and Germany, King's Highway in UK, and All or Nothing in Germany. Incredible that All or Nothing wasn't released as a single.
Yeah, and well, that was the track I was alluding to.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled a few quotes from the documentary and from the book that I wanted to mention, just about the recording process and like sort of the mood of the band as they were making it, because Tom very much he had a lot of success with Full Moon Fever. I think that's putting it lightly. And he wanted to marry Jeff Lynne's production, or Jeff Lynne producer, with the Heartbreakers. And there's I believe it was a documentary. I remember Tom and Mike sitting at in the studio, and he said, quote, we all played on it. We were never all there at the same time. And then I think the interviewer asked why not. He said, well, we were being a little moody at the time. And then later on in the documentary, a quote, it was a successful experiment, but a tough one because Jeff Lynne doesn't really like to produce groups. And this is interesting. You could read between the lines as to what's happening. He also, from the book, says, quote, it's not a bad album, which is a weird thing to say, kind of, right? It's not a bad album. I think later on in the quote, he's more positive about it, but he says, I don't think it was the best way to work with the Heartbreakers. He goes, it was my feeling that they might have been a little intimidated, or feeling, and this quote really struck me, or feeling that I'm dragging them onto my boat instead of coming onto theirs, end quote. And then they have Ben Mott in the documentary saying, quote, it wasn't any fun.
Yeah.
Because he was just the way they were recording, because they were pulling him in just to play little parts, and they were allowing him, I think, to be creative in those little things, but he wasn't playing with the band. And
No.
I think that's how they pretty much recorded their whole career to that point. And then Stan was saying, quote, it wasn't a high point creatively for me, end quote. And he basically said earlier in that quote that he wasn't allowed to hang, and it wasn't like any camaraderie he didn't feel amongst the band. And those were some of those little fractures, I think, that we're seeing there with how the band operated, how they recorded, and then ultimately with Stan leaving the band.
Yeah.
What was sort of going on behind the scenes with it.
Well, I'm pretty sure that this one too, the record executive, I can't remember, whoever was in charge, that had released Full Moon Fever, said this one's going to be bigger. And he said this is going to, and he gave Tom, oh, this is going to sell 6 million units or 9 million or whatever. And Tony Dimitriadis quoted saying, like, why would you tell the artist that? Just say we're fully behind it, because you're just building expectations. And then if the record doesn't do that, it can be easy for the artist to think, well, that's flop then. Like if this record was supposed to sell this many units and it didn't, then that's, quote unquote a failure. But I mean, it's funny when when artists talk about that, and you can tell, like your Kiss and some of these bands where that's all they judge their creative output on is sales. But sales aren't always indicative of quality. And I think this album, we'll get into as we get into this, the quality of this album is astounding. I mean, it's like you said. I mean, he drags the Heartbreakers into the studio to work with Jeff Lynne, and of course, that is going to be a problem, right? Because Jeff and Tom have been hanging around for a long time now, doing Full Moon Fever, Traveling Wilburys. They're buddies. He's got away from the Heartbreakers, and so dragging them into that situation where they've got this guy who's super tight with and works really well with. You can see why that's going to be a problem. So there's all those factors, like you said, they all come into play at the same time. And so again, it's a bit like Echo. You can see why when band members or when Tom looks back at it, you're going to think about that more than maybe you're going to think about, well, what were the songs like?
Yeah, and coming off of Full Moon Fever, I think the band itself was sort of a little bit jilted
Mm-hmm.
by maybe not so much by I think partly because that was his first solo album, and some of them were invited into those sessions and some weren't.
Yeah.
And it was a giant monster hit. And so I'm sure that's just creeping into their minds a bit. Like, is he leaving? He always said that he wasn't leaving. He'd always be back, but he wanted to go do this stuff on the side. And, obviously meeting Jeff Lynne led to the Wilburys and all this other work that he was doing. And then Full Moon Fever. So I think it's in one point, it's an olive branch, because he's
Yeah.
like, Full Moon Fever is such a success. I want to continue with Jeff Lynne as a co-writer and as a producer. And on the other hand, we're due to do a Heartbreakers album, but this is kind of the way we have to do it. And so he was, I don't know, I wouldn't say strong arming, but this is the process with Jeff. So
Yeah.
you got to kind of get in line if you want to make a Heartbreakers album. But I think it was such a grind and I don't know if it was such a grind with the Heartbreakers that he didn't use Jeff again on the next album, and went a different direction. We can talk about that as well, or maybe it just sort of, that relationship had sort of run its course in terms of this time span.
Well, I think, obviously we're not going to start talking about Wildflowers too much, but if you think about that collection of songs and where those came from, Jeff Lynne's not the right guy for that set of songs, right? And I mean, I love Jeff Lynne. I love his production. I don't have the same problems that a lot of people do with the way his records sound. But if Jeff Lynne produces Wildflowers, I don't think that album is nearly the same, right? And I think it
Right.
is interesting, like you said, because if you're used to recording in the room as a band and working things out as the Heartbreakers, like you said, as they were, and Benmont, if you listen to those interviews for the Mojo sessions, he says, I like being no headphones. I want to look at the guy's eyes and play off what he's doing. If you're just coming in and saying, well, here's the bed track, this is roughly what you want to do, it's totally different. Then you're really more or less just a session player, right? Which Benmont was. Benmont did tons of session work, but not for the Heartbreakers. So, like I said, again, that friction, you can totally understand where it comes from. But again, I think that, or you would hope that when they look at the songs they got out of those sessions, we just look at the songs and all of them are all about songs. I don't know how you can really sort of complain that it didn't work. But it's also the last time they did that too, right? If you think about it, they never used this approach again as a band. And when Tom went off and did Highway Companion, they even, like, I think that was even more separation, because literally that was just the three of them. That was just Jeff, Tom, and Mike. There's no additional musicians on that record. And I think that's that deliberate thing. Well, I'm going to keep this completely separate because that hybrid thing and just bringing Benmont in for one song didn't work, and I don't want to piss him off anymore. So it's just that learning experience and trying a different way of doing it, which, like I said, I think it worked.
Yeah, I think Mike worked fine with Jeff. So it was just some of the band members that, I mean, but he was the one that was included in Full Moon Fever and wrote some of those songs. So as a different dynamic. The other, I just wanted you to go over those singles again. You said that how many were released in the United States?
So there's just two in the States. Learning to Fly, Into the Great Wide Open. Learning to Fly hit 28 on the Billboard, and Into the Great Wide Open only hit 92. Out in the Cold charted on the mainstream rock chart, but that's just from radio play off the album. It was never released as a single. Yeah.
Okay, so that's why I was seeing this. I saw Learning to Fly at 1 on the rock chart, Into the Great Wide Open 4, Out in the Cold 1, King's Highway 4, and Making Some Noise 30. But you're just saying those are just airplay, not single proper singer releases.
Absolutely. Remember when radio stations used to play album tracks in the good old days, when they would just think, well, that's a good song, let's play that,
And that's when the DJs actually had ownership over what they were playing, which is something that comes up later in Tom's career. But I want to mention Full Moon Fever, 5 times platinum, by the RIAA, Into the Great Wide Open, twice platinum. So there's a couple of points here. One is that you could look at this as a follow-up to Full Moon Fever and be disappointed in the sales. However, it's the Heartbreakers' biggest selling album since Damn the Torpedoes.
Yeah.
So definitely two different ways to look at it in terms of Tom's career and where this one stands. And I think it is an extension to me of Full Moon Fever, but we're also going to you have some controversial statements about where this album fits within his chapters, or where Full Moon Fever fits within his chapters of his career, but we can talk about that a little bit later. But to me, this is definitely the spiritual partner to Full Moon Fever, and I think it is an extension of that sound and really the songwriting style and the process with Jeff Lynne at producer.
And I always sort of considered this is where I was a little bit, I'm surprised, maybe is the right word, about by this album, by the quality of the songs, because Into the Great Wide Open to me was always sort of in my mind the lesser sibling of Full Moon Fever, right? It was that thing of, okay, well, we've done Full Moon Fever, it's a huge hit, and I did, for some reason I had it into my brain that, well, maybe they're just sort of chasing that and let's do that again because that was successful, which I absolutely, I'm firmly of the belief now that that isn't the case. It was just the natural progression. But I wanted to ask you, is this a 10 out of 10 album? I mean, we talk about 10 out of 10 albums. I think Damn the Torpedoes is. I think Wildflowers is. I think Full Moon Fever probably is, even though I don't think all the songs are, there's a couple of songs on there that we both sort of sequenced off. What do you think about Into the Great Wide Open? Do you think it's a 10 out of 10?
I would probably give, if I had to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, no half stars, I probably would give it a 9.
Right.
I looked at all music. I kind of wanted to see where this placed within fans' judgment in terms of how this rated.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, how could I do that? And I was going to do a poll on Twitter, and I was just like, well, I'm just going to get some troll. Who knows what's going to happen there? The bots are going to come.
Yeah.
But so I went to allmusic.com, which is a pretty good site. And I remember that they have their review star rating, and then they have the user average star rating. And it's one of, he doesn't according to the users of All Music, he doesn't have a full 5-star album, but he has 6 albums that are rated 4.5 stars, so 4.5 stars.
Okay.
This is one of them. The other 5 are the self-titled debut, Damn the Torpedoes, Hard Promises, Full Moon Fever, and Wildflowers. So the users, and I would assume these are fans that are coming to the site to rate the album, put it up there with his top 6 albums, and I would say that's a pretty good list. Maybe I would dispute the self-titled debut as being that strong start to finish. But Damn the Torpedoes, Hard Promises, which I know you love, Full Moon Fever I love, obviously Wildflowers is up there. So like for them to rate this album to that level, I think speaks not so much to the commercial success is there. Mm-hmm. We do have a monster hit with Learning to Fly, another pretty big hit that got a lot of MTV airplay with the video for Into the Great Wide Open, and a few other, I would say, minor hits. It's not as stacked as Full Moon Fever, but listening to this again, and this is one I loved putting on, and I would never skip a song. And I think it's still, there isn't a skip on this album. No. And if there isn't a skip on this album, I would probably say it's a minimum of a 9. And then it becomes a question of how high are the highs? Like how many hits are there? How many amazing songs are there that maybe were giant hits or reasons that someone would go out and buy the album?
Well, and that's where I think that is the main sort of difference, and the thing that you're going to talk about, whether Full Moon Fever or this one's, quote unquote better, is that Full Moon Fever is just blessed with those 3 gigantic songs, right? That Tom played pretty much every show after that and were huge hits, where Learning to Fly is on that level for sure, in terms of, it was always played, fans love it, it's got different arrangements that he did with it. Into the Great Wide Open, I don't think does quite have that same punch, right? It doesn't have that same impact. And then after that, All or Nothing is a fan favorite, but it was never released a single, so it didn't get that wide. And it is a bit more of it's not really a pop song. It's got more of a specificity, but there's a thing that it is, right? And it sits in its own little spot, even within Tom's catalog. But then, some of the deep cuts on this album, I got to tell you, man, like I've had 2 or 3 songs on this album they're just stuck in my brain, that I listen to all the time, and they're not the songs that I thought would be the case when I went into it.
Yeah, let's get into the song by song, because it was very interesting hearing your As I feel like the overall arching sense of listening to your song by song episodes is that you were surprised by this album in
Yeah.
general, and we're really pleased with it.
Yeah, I didn't, yeah, I wasn't ready. And because again, I mean, learning to fly, you open up with learning to fly. I mean, good God. I mean, again, can you write a more perfect pop song than this? It's three chords. It's the same sort of, the same idea behind it as free falling, where you three chords, keep it simple, let the vocal and the lyrics carry it, and just write something that's got a huge hook. And he just nails it again.
Yeah, this is one where you could look at it, and I heard this in 1991, so I was 17, 18, and kind of past the really coming of age, but still reminiscent of it. So I kind of looked at it from the lyrics from a kid standpoint or from a
Yeah.
young adult standpoint. But you know, listening to it now, it's very much he wrote this I think when he was 41 or thereabouts, and as you get into middle age and you become a parent, you could definitely read the lyrics as a maybe as a parent talking to his child, his or her child, or trying to parlay some of this wisdom to
Yeah.
to the kids as to what's it like to grow up. And you go out, and it's just like this whole album has a real good overarching theme, Into the Great Wide Open, that you are sort of growing up, and you're perhaps sending your children out into the world, or you yourself are going out into the world, and you don't know where this is all going to end up. And this is a great start to that whole story.
When, as you said earlier, I've got an opinion that may be controversial. I do think this is a stronger album overall than Full Moon Fever, and you've hit on the nail on the head there about why I think that is because there is a cohesiveness to this album. Thematically, there are through lines throughout this whole album, and there are pairs of songs or triplets of songs that you can sort of point to and say there's a thread there. There's a definite thing that he's saying and reinforcing there, and there's also this insane universality to it. Like you said, learning to fly can mean anything. Like you can apply it to. He wrote it so broadly that you can apply it to anything. Even as a 41-year-old rock star, learning to fly, ain't got wings. Like that's that uncertainty about the Heartbreakers come back into it with Jeff Lynne, and maybe this will break up the band. Maybe this is the end point. If this doesn't work, maybe I fold and I go solo. There's so many different ways that you can interpret the lyrics that I think it's just a masterpiece.
And you mentioned that they, always played it at concerts, and I would agree with that in general, but they didn't always play it at
Yeah,
this is a testament to uh, Tom's discography. As he got older, like he just literally could not play all of his hits.
yeah,
And this is one that might get skipped here and there and wouldn't be at every show. I mean, I don't remember how many times I saw him. I think it was 15 to 20. And I would say most of the time he played it. And especially later on in his career, he started playing it acoustically, uh, almost like a ballad. And I was listening
yeah,
to it again, trying to put my finger on it. It's really the same tempo, but it's a lot quieter. And it's just him with the guitar. And there might be a little bit of a piano from Benmont, and but nothing like the studio version, which is more fuller with the full
yeah.
band and everything. So it's interesting that maybe he played it that way and really liked the way that it came off and decided that was going to be the sort of the way that they were going to play it going forward, and it sort of just changed the song for him. Or I don't know if he perhaps got sick of playing it the other way. And sometimes artists do that, where they change the format of the song, the arrangement, in order to bring new life to it and make it fun for them to play again. But that
Yeah.
was always an interesting decision to me, because it did come off great as a late, either as part of a little acoustic set in the middle of the set, or as late a song either in the encore or late in the main set, where he was trying to bring the crowd down and get a little emotion in there.
So you must have seen it both ways then, right? You must have seen sort of on the Take the Highway tour, the Integrated Open tour, they would have been full arrangement, and then later on with I mean, that performance at Gainesville, on the Running Down a Dream doc, it is just euphoric. One of my top 10 all-time favorite live performances of any song, I think. Just
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, I definitely saw it both ways. The initial time seeing it, because it was certainly, I would describe it as an up tempo. I wouldn't know if I guess a rocker, but not a rocker, not a banger.
Yeah,
A typical Mike Campbell banger, and you could see his fingerprints on things.
yeah,
But an up tempo, like energetic performance versus the very quiet, subdued performance, and it definitely was a shift. I like it both ways, and it's nice to hear it both ways, because I think over the last maybe 5 or 10 years, I've really only heard the ballad. And so going back and listening to the studio version quite a few times for this podcast, you kind of forget how great of a up-tempo song it is.
Okay, but well, we'll move on then. We were talking about tempo and up tempo. Second song is King's Highway. And I got to tell you, I think I might have rated this low and I gave it an 8, but I think that might be a point low.
You gave it an 8, and then via DM you said it should be higher, which is funny because you did this just a few weeks ago. I listened to this. I think I said to you via DM that this is a banger, and like I forgot how good this one is. This is the track that they opened that tour with, which says something, right?
Yeah,
This says
100%.
okay, this is a good song from this new album that we can open the tour with. And I think Tom was always one that took advantage of that slot in the live set, because the crowd is so excited to see you that they'll respond to just about anything. And so that's not a bad spot to put a song that you want to play that's up tempo, but maybe is not a huge hit. Like, he would rarely open his concerts with a giant hit.
Yeah.
It was usually something like this. But it worked. He gets a great reaction from the crowd because they're all excited to see him. And then now he's played King's Highway. He doesn't have to worry about it later. I wanted to mention that Learning to Fly was the 5th most streamed album or song of all time of his. King's Highway was the 3rd most streamed on this album, peaked at 4, as we mentioned earlier. I love the ascending single notes towards the end with a great finish. I thought it was a little bit strange that it wasn't on the anthology Through the Years double disc that they released from MCA. I thought it could have been, just given some of the selections that they made for that. And that there's a live acoustic version on playback people should check out if they haven't. It's very different, but it's beautiful. He had a tendency to do that with going with a live acoustic version to change the format of the song.
There's a lot. If you listen to a lot of the songs off this album, it's actually quite. There's I think 3 or 4 songs I would noted that they never played them the same way. Where they would always slow them down or they'd always play them differently. And of course, like we said, we were talking about the production style and the way that Jeff Lynne arranges. Quite often you can't play them live the way that they're recorded because you don't have that many guitar players. So there's different things you got to do and you got to adapt it. But I think it shows the strength of the song when you can change the arrangement and it still works. But you talk about this as an opening number. I think you should always start a concert with a major key. That's just I don't think you should start on a down. I don't think you should start on a minor. I don't think it should be pensive or edgy or anything like that. Start out, get us all happy, get us all moving. And this song, Van Halen opened with Jump when I saw them live. Like, how cocky is that, right? Bring out, and that is a big, big hit. But it's perfect, right? Because it just sets the tone.
Yeah.
King's Highway. I mean, you're up straight away, right? Everyone loves that song.
Yeah, it's a good one, and it's a good number 2, following up Learning to Fly as well. Like these two go well together, and then you get into stop me if you want to keep talking about King's Highway, but you get into the Great Wide Open. Now this got I would say a lot of airplay. It was a popular song. You obviously saw it on MTV a ton. So this was on the verge for me of being a bit overplayed
right
at the time. And it would not be, especially as we got into the 90s and the Dogs with Wings tour and the subsequent tours that I saw after that. When he went into this, I was a bit disappointed because I would prefer the spot being used on a different song or a different mid-tempo song, because it just was like, okay, I've heard him play this a few times. I'd rather hear something else, right? Or Straight Into Darkness or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's 2nd most streamed on the album, the 13th most streamed song of all time. So obviously
crazy.
It was a big one for him, and I think part of it was driven by that video. And going back and listening to it now, because it's not one I put on. It's on my playlist, but it's not one I put on and say, "Oh, I want to hear this track." Listening to it within the context of the album, it really works. And I think as an older listener now, it's even better because of just sort of the story aspect to it, and sort of. And then I get a little bit nostalgic because I think about the video. I'm like, okay, they did a good job with this one.
Well, like you said, though, there are little connection points, right? So even if you think about King's Highway, under a big old sky out in a field of green, There's that, and then even the King's Highway, we'll ride down the King's Highway into the Great Wide Open. Thematically, that just dovetails nicely. And like we talked about sequencing, this album's sequenced really, really, really well. And
Perfectly.
the lead into Great, and I totally agree with you. And I'd given this one a 9, and I think this is where when I'm kind of going through afterwards, and because I look at the song for the song's sake, and the lyrics in this are so good. The story it tells is so good. It's one of Tom's best 2 or 3 narrative songs. But musically, it doesn't move around too much. There's not a ton of change in it. So I'd probably actually drop this one to an 8, maybe, or an 8.5 if I was doing halves. But I mean, yeah, like you said, you've just heard it a million times. So it's one of those, it's like Bohemian Rhapsody. You forget how good it is because you don't really listen to it. But it's a good song. But,
And I just want to mention, this is the first time that they re-edited the music to fit the video. So they
yeah,
had some, it's really old. It's under a 4-minute song, right? It seems like when I think about it, I think it's a long song, but I'm thinking of the video.
yeah,
The video is 7 minutes. So they like added music to suit the video, which is so crazy for him, but it's the first time they did it.
yeah.
And it's also a rare example. We talk about these mid-tempo bangers, this pile of songs that are kind of ballads, but not really. And a lot of them weren't released or played on the radio or whatever. But this is one that was actually a hit. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's a rarity at this point because he did have um, a couple other tracks
Well,
that
free
don't
free
come around.
falling's in
Yeah,
roughly the same sort of space too, right? But
yeah. I think as we were talking about the older albums, Straight Into Darkness got released as a single. Didn't really make it anywhere.
mhm.
And then there's some other Insider. So I think as he got into this era, they were starting to release some of these songs. Face in the Crowd was really was a minor hit for him as well. But this is another one that not a rocker, a bit of a rocker at times, but not really a rocker that you would traditional rocker that you would apply to Tom Petty and the
Yeah.
Heartbreakers.
More great Mike Campbell guitar work on this song too, and 2 misheard lyrics for me on this one because
Okay.
before I'd actually looked at the lyrics. So when he says the paper said Ed always played from the heart, when I'm singing along in the car, I'd always sung the paper said he'd always played from the heart. I didn't think it was Ed. So and it's that
Ed.
again. Tom does that phrasing sometimes where he bends those vowels and you're not quite sure exactly what he's saying. But the other one, which I find hilarious now, their A&R man said, "I don't hear a single." Well, I didn't know. I'd never heard the term A&R man when I heard this song. I thought he was saying Theray and Armand, which I assumed Theray was a French name and Armand definitely is. So okay, well that's weird. Why are they commenting? Who are these people? So,
Uh,
they're A&R man. That makes way more sense.
yeah, and that's actually probably inspired by the fact that uh, Full Moon
Well,
Fever,
yep.
when he played it for the label, they said they didn't hear a single. So I think that made it into this maybe as a little jab. I don't know. There's an American Treasure live version, which I think I like it better live at this point because I've heard
Yeah.
the studio version so many times. It's really good. It's also on the first greatest hits disc, which makes sense, and the anthology.
So now I was going to talk to you about that, and we'll get into this when we talk about the greatest hits. But this did make the greatest hits album, despite not charting as highly on the Billboard chart as Jamming Me. And Jamming Me doesn't make the album and means that Let Me Up I've Had Enough doesn't make the album. So I'm primed for some argument from JP when we get to greatest hits about, whether that should be included, how we remedy this. Do we just include another one? So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by greatest hits selections and
Yeah.
exclusions and snubs. And we also had at that point the 74-minute time limit on the CD.
Hmm.
You have double LP time limits. So there's lots of factors going on there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, next song, Two Gunslingers. Personal favorite of mine. I mean, I gave this a 10, which I know that probably would have raised a few eyebrows, but I just think this song is astonishing. And again, one of those little sleeper tracks that you couldn't release it as a single. It would never be a hit. But when you dig into it, and I really dug into the lyrics in this one and got a little bit obsessed with them. And I'm probably going to go back and actually do a little bit more thinking about that too, because again, that universality is there, but you've got sort of, what I'd posited is I said the verse 1 sets up the human choice to stop fighting. Verse 2 moves the focus to the bystanders, the sort of the voyeuristic part of human nature. And then verse 3 sort of pulls that camera, it's that 50,000 foot view. So that again, whether that's intentional or whether that's just that intuitive thing that Tom seems to have as well, I don't know. And I'm probably layering on all sorts of meaning that isn't there. But I think that's the thing about great art, right? Is it can prompt you to think about those things and to consider those types of, ideas a little bit more fully. And if you can put that around a framework like this little, what is it, 3 minutes, 3 minutes and 9 seconds, this little sort of jaunty pop song on the face, it's a hell of a feat to pull that trick off, I think.
It's lyrically deep, and we're seeing, like, he was always a good lyricist, but the story aspect of it,
Yeah.
we see it popping up here in the last few albums. Yeah, I just immediately thought of You're So Bad with the story about his sister and ex-husband, and
Yeah.
just everything that's going on with that and how dark that is. But this one is more, he described it as a really good anti-war song, and
Yeah.
I think it was written around the time of the first Gulf War, and that's what he was alluding to there. And I took that, I think, hearing this as a 18-year-old or whatever, I took it that way. I took it as a, or at least a people that have to fight or do battle in a performative way,
Yeah.
just deciding not to do that anymore. And then also the people around watching saying, this is the last one of these gunfights you're ever going to drag me to.
Such a great line.
Yeah. And lyrically just top notch. And I think this is a fan favorite. It's the fourth most streamed on the album. And like, we're 4 songs in, we have a really good side A here.
Yeah.
I mean, and then we're even talking about the next track, I think, goes really, and you mentioned this on your episode podcast, that the next track pairs really well with this, and I would completely agree with that. There's a slower live acoustic version on American Treasure of Two Gunslingers, so they did play it live here and there. It was a fan favorite. The studio version was included on the anthology.
Mhm.
And I did think it was interesting that they included that over King's Highway or Out in the Cold, because those two did not get included. But there's a bunch of questionable songs that are on the anthology. Maybe we could briefly talk about that. That was like the last MCA release that he didn't see why it needed to be released, and they were just they had all the hits on there, but then they were trying to get their favorites on there. So it's a bunch of hodgepodge of some strange decisions. But we can talk about that another time.
It's tell me you've got a contractual obligation without telling me you've got a contractual obligation, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was looking through. I did do a bit of digging on Two Gunslingers. They never played it with that sort of up tempo arrangement. Whenever they played it live, it was always that kind of stripped back, very sort of direct delivery that Tom used. Yeah, it's a great song, and yeah, like that. This last one of these gunfights you're ever going to drag me to is just such a nice bit of levity in the middle of this song. But again, I connected to this song, I think, too, because of that. In World War One, when the troops stopped fighting and the English and German troops both came over the trenches to exchange Christmas gifts. Christmas 1914, they exchange Christmas gifts. Game of football breaks out, and then they go back to slaughtering each other in their millions. After, there's something very human about that, and that there's something in this song that lands in that same space for me. So there's just a really strong connection that I have with this song.
The other line that I thought about more this last time I listened to it was the Two Gunslingers rode out of town. I didn't know if I should take that as they rode out of town separately or they rode out of town together. Like, I think in my mind's eye, they were riding out of town together, which would be a different, than if they just took off separate ways and just decided not to engage anymore. But there's two different ways to read that line as well.
Well, the other, because I got to thinking about that too. Like I said, that lyric is he leaves so much open, and which is what when he does that, he does it almost better than anyone else. There's no real explicit statement that they're fighting each other. Two gunslingers steps in. They could be fighting against a posse, or they could be together, or they could be on the same side. You don't really know. Like, it leaves all that open. And again, I think that's why it's one of the reasons that song works so well for me. It's just there's so much you can dig into lyrically in it, and then the music I think is wonderful too. But
that's interesting that you said that, because I always viewed them as the Two Gunslingers battling each other. Yeah.
But again, it's not explicit, right? So you could, if you wanted to make an argument from the other way, you could write that narrative too. It's super cool. Dark in the Sun, yeah. I mean, you literally couldn't pick any other song to follow it, right? So
yeah, this is like thematically going really well, and just it's just sequenced. This album is really sequenced well, and it's cohesive. And it probably is, well, perhaps due to Jeff Lynne and Tom having complete control over this whole situation and having
Yeah.
a 3,000-foot view of it, or a 30,000-foot view of it, whichever the saying is. Fifth most streamed song on the album. I definitely agree with your assessment. This pairs well with Two Gunslingers, and that was something that I hadn't noticed until I listened to it after you said that, and I was like, oh yeah, this really is a nice follow-up to that song. And
Yeah.
in the book, he said he regretted that he never played it live, Dark of the Sun, because that would have been a good one to work in
Bananas.
there.
Couldn't believe that when I read that, because that's, where I always like go through and I look at setlist.fm and go things like, oh, I must have been playing. I mean, and there are, there's probably 2-3 dozen set lists on setlist.fm that are not filled in. So
Right.
possibly, and that's where I've got to go to Petty Live and start digging through those. But as far as I can tell, he never played it live, and he does say, right, that that
He says
it's
it, yeah. So
it's one
he
that,
would know, or he would
yeah,
at least have an idea.
yeah, yeah. Great song about, and it's that contradiction, the dark of the sun, which doesn't sound right, but it's all about that juxtaposition. It's light and shade, hope and despair, violence and love is what I'd written. And so that if you connect and if you want to sort of write that narrative and draw that narrative through from Two Gunslingers, if they let, they ride out of town and they're never seen from or never heard from again, maybe the Two Gunslingers are the subjects of Dark of the Sun. And I know that then you're treading into dangerous waters if you've got same-sex relationships potentially, or whatever else it is. But narratively, you can do it. You can join those dots and you can bring that through. And I think that's again, that's just super cool if it's one story. And I tell you, like the solo in this song, I it blows my mind how good it is. Like, and I mean, from it, it's not a shredder. I love Eddie Van Halen. I love Brian May. I love Satriani. I like the guys who can play a million notes a second, whatever. This solo for me it's just one of the best solos anyone's ever done, because it's still super technical too, by the way. Because you listen to it and where he's choosing to hammer on, pull off, where he's choosing to just slide on the fretboard, and where he's choosing to actually strike the string is super, super specific to get a very specific tone. And it's only 8 bars. Like, it's this small little solo, and it doesn't come exactly where you think it's going to be, but it changes the mood of the song again. It just lifts everything and makes it this beautiful, crystal clear section in the middle of a song I like anyway, but that this solo just elevates it. It's so good.
It's just another example of why Mike Campbell is my favorite
Yeah.
guitarist of all time. I don't think I'm going to qualify that anymore. Going back to doing this podcast, listening to everything all over again, and especially in an album context where you're getting some of these minor hits or just album tracks, and he's just crushing it every single time. Like, he just knows what to play, when to play it.
It just keeps getting better. There's, like I said, the solos on this record that you sort of forget about, but there's so many different styles of solo on this album too. Like, you've got the slides, you've got All or Nothing's, this sort of frenetic, erratic thing, and we'll talk about that song next. And then you get Built to Last at the end, has this very different tone again. So again, like you said, he just knows what to play every single time. It's unerring. It's incredible. I don't know if I mean, there's lots of session players who can do that, but to do that in a big band like the Heartbreakers, and like you say, do it every single song for decades, there's not many people who've matched that, in my opinion.
And his personality just fits so well with Tom's, and that he's happy to be the right hand man and is humble enough, doesn't need to have to shine, to have the credit of everything and have all the glory. Like, he
Yeah,
just was a very nice compliment to Tom Petty's songwriting
could have been a
and
front
guitar
man.
playing.
Could have been a
Yeah.
frontman in any other band as well, right? I mean, really, on by his own right, he's a good singer. He's not Tom Petty level, but he could have been the frontman. He's a lot better than bloody Axl Rose and some other singers I could name, or I'd like rather listen to. But let's get into. We're talking about Mike Campbell. Let's get into All or Nothing, because holy hell,
Yeah,
what a song this is.
that's his first co-write credit on this album. The last track on side A. You said it was released as a single, not in the US.
I think it was in
Just
Germany, or
Germany.
let me just double check. I think it
What
was. I
what
think,
what the decision? What's the decision process behind that? Like, well, we're going to release it as a single in Germany, but not in the United States. I don't know.
I think they do look at radio play sometimes. Like, if a song for some reason is getting lots of radio plays, okay, well maybe we'll put that out. We'll put that out as a single, or they think there's a certain sensibility that matches with what's going on. Who the hell knows? Eh? It's super weird.
I was a bit surprised that you gave it a 10, because just my memory of the song was like, it's a really solid, good track. But when going back and listening to it and just listening to it, it does take a step up, I think.
Oh,
Tom said it's mostly, quote unquote, mostly Mike's track. He said you could almost take Mike for granted because anything you asked him to do, he did it and more. I don't ever remember throwing anything his way that he couldn't do. He could do it, and he could do it better than you thought. He will give you back your idea better than you had it in the first place. That's a great musician. And that was from the book.
yeah.
Like, he also said that this one, he wished that it had gotten radio airplay out in the cold, but then later on, because he had said that prior to the book, and Zollo brought it up and asked him about it, and he said yes, but then we went back and played Out in the Cold, and I really liked the lyrics, and I really liked that song
Yeah.
as well. So he sort of qualified it and kind of wavered on that stance that it should have gotten radio airplay over Out in the Cold. Interesting, just to think back to that, and how an artist also wants certain songs to get more respect,
Yeah.
or thinks that certain songs should get more airplay than others. And that this is all going on in Tom's mind after the album comes out.
Well, I know lots of people who are recording artists who write and record and release albums, and they say, I mean, universally, it's like, well, your perception of a specific song could even just be tied to, oh, that was such a hard song to get over the line in the studio, or I was having a shit time at home, or whatever it might be while we were recording that song or mixing whatever. So those associations sometimes can be, or there's, it could be the opposite. It could be, I think this is the best song I've ever written. I know it's not a single or an album release, but I find there's something about this that I love. So of course those things are going to be at the time when you're in the thick of it. That's what you're going to be thinking. But I think that's the beauty of Paul Zollo's book, is it did force Tom to be a little bit more, I think, forgiving of his own music and his own art, and sort of say, okay, well, actually, yeah, that's a better song than I remember it was. So
It starts off interesting lyrically. Your daddy was a sergeant major. You didn't wanna, but he made you, and you don't know where this is going. But it's then he says, wipe his brass from time to time. It left a picture in your mind, and then gets on with the rest of the song. But it's almost
yeah,
like, and I would assume he's talking about a daughter, but perhaps it's a son. But you want it all or nothing. You want it all. And then the third verse, sweet chariots of LA swing low at twilight time. The smog makes a rainbow. So keep one eye on the weather. You had it good, but you want it better. Interesting.
I mean, come on, that's poetry,
Yeah.
right? That's just pure poetry. And I think this is, Mike Campbell said that he brought this in pretty much fully formed, and you can tell it's a Mike Campbell joint. But when Tom wrote these lyrics, you're like, holy shit, dude, wow, okay. Because all the verses in this are so good.
Yeah, the second verse. My load is wide, my street is narrow, my thin skin is thicker, my heart is tougher. I don't mind
Yeah.
working, but I'm scared to suffer. Oh,
And the way it delivers, my skin is thicker.
yeah.
I just
My
love
heart
that.
is
It's so
tougher.
cool, man. Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing about this song that I don't love. And it's one of those that I remember the first time I heard this one, as I sort of got into Petty, and thought, wow, I wouldn't have seen that type of song coming out of Petty. And especially it's got a very sleazy, dirty, slick kind of, like underground feel to it that doesn't, it really does contrast with everything else we've heard on side one of the album so far. So it shouldn't really fit. And yet Jeff Lynne, Tom, and Mike figure out a way, production wise, to get it to be the exact song that you need to close side one. Again, just it's a weird
it
bit
totally
of
works.
genius.
Yeah. This is a really good side A. It's up there with all of his side A's.
And I love the way this one ends too. Just land on that nothing, cut all the instruments out, and just have that vocal on nothing. Very clever, right? All those those little production things that they're all sitting there, and you can just imagine Jeff Lynne, oh, I've had an idea. Why don't we just cut out the music a little bit early? Because then nothing is double meaning. And then they go off and have tea and they come back, oh, that works. Yeah, that'll do. So that's my Jeff Lynne impression, by the way.
Very good. I didn't know that you had that skill.
It's just a Birmingham. It's just a generic Birmingham accent. So. Okay, well, side two opens up with a song that, again, you think that's kind of strange that you're opening up this side of the album with this one. Was never played live, all the wrong reasons. What are your thoughts on this one?
As I was growing up listening to this contemporaneously, this was the one I thought was the sneakiest, awesome song on the album. Like, yeah. My tastes have grown a bit, gotten maybe more complex, or have just aging in general. But I really like the melody, the opening melody. It's extremely uh, grandiose, and Tom compared it to Free Fallin', and I could definitely see that in terms of the high aspirational uh, music.
Yeah.
But I see it as also as a spiritual cousin to Somewhere Under Heaven, which was written a few years later for the Wildflower Sessions, wasn't released until a long time later, but definitely with the same sort of vibe. Musically has a different melody, but has got that same grandeur as both those tracks to me.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like it's about a middle class father and his daughter, working class father and his daughter. I'm not sure story wise what else is happening here, but it's very, God, it's just the music to it is pretty incredible. And Benmont really liked it apparently and was
Yeah.
pushing for them to play it, I believe. It sounds like it's about the moral decay of America. Quote, things that wouldn't have been tolerated suddenly were almost celebrated. I think that's what the quote about this song.
Right.
Pretty, this is an interesting one, and not one I don't think they ever played it live.
No,
I might be wrong, but I
they
wouldn't
didn't.
think this was one that would. But it's a really good one. And it's a great way to start side two.
Well, it's got again. You got the first verse is, like it tells a story. Trouble blew in on a cold dark wind. It came without no warning, and that big old house went up for sale. They were on the road by morning, and that was sort of semi-biographical. Where Tom knew someone where he said like their neighbors just one day they were gone. Like they packed up. They the market had crashed. They lost all the money, and then they were just gone. So that's where he takes that from a situation that he'd observed. And then the second verse, well, she grew up hard, she grew up fast in the age of television. She made it all a bit of to have it all. It became a new religion. I think that is a bit broader, and I don't think that that's necessarily the same person from the first verse, and especially because then the third verse becomes that very universal thing, where the sky begins, the horizon ends. Despite the best intentions, a big old man goes up for sale. He becomes his own invention. He becomes his own invention. Like what a frigging line that is as well, right? So you've got this
Yeah.
weird little it's almost like it's like a vignette thing, right? It's almost like a Tarantino compendium kind of movie where it's just three distinct things, but they just sort of fit together. A brilliant piece of writing again, lyrically.
And actually, they could be the same characters
Yeah, it could be.
if you
Yeah,
want to read it that way as well. But I agree with your assessment that maybe it's not. It's just a very I just the music and it's just incredible.
well, it's he talks about Benmont. I was reading in the book. He tells Paul Zollo, I cracked up when reading Bob Dylan's book. There's a bit in there about Benmont pestering him to play certain songs. God bless him. Benmont keeps the vigil. He keeps us honest. So. But also too, like you think about this song, not one that you would think because it's not a big Benmont song. There's not a ton of Benmont on this song. It's mainly guitars and sort of the melody. It doesn't. There's not a ton of Benmont. He's not shredding piano. He's not playing anything intricate. But again, that's where all the Heartbreakers were musicians and they cared about the songs. And so Benmont loves this song, so he wants to play it, and he'll find a way to fit in. But yeah, same thing. Another one that I was like, man, this song's great. And so I ended up learning this on the piano because they're super simple chords. They're really just cowboy chords, right? It's that easy. But I found that because the song actually changes, the chords actually all change. But I found that if you play, I can't remember which key it's in, but if you play, it's called pedal point. So basically, if you keep the same bass notes and change the chord over top of that through the verses, it really works well and slightly changes the feel of it. It was pretty cool. But I'm going to learn that. I think I might do a version of this one. I think I might cover it.
Nice.
I like it that much.
You gave it an 8, so that's a solid score for an
Yeah.
album track like this. Yeah.
Next track I gave a 7. Too good to be true. I think overall, if we're saying, we do have to, you can sort of, if you're thinking about the quality or strength of the songs on the album, I think this might just about be the weakest, which doesn't mean it isn't a good song, but it's the one I think of. It's probably the one that I'm going to listen to the least if I'm sort of just picking random songs from Into the Great Wide Open. What is this one land for you?
This one was, let's see, it looks like it was released in the UK, and that's it.
Hmm.
Is that right? This was the second track on that tour after Kings of Highway. So they would start off with 2 tracks, and then they would typically go into I Won't Back Down and Free Fallin'.
Right. That's just
So
showing off, man. Come on.
yeah, I mean, but I mean, I think this is sort of writing, from a concert standpoint, he's plugging a couple of the new songs early when the fans are very
Yeah.
open and excited, and you start to play 3 or 4 new songs in a row, then people start to get a little restless. So he had definitely had his finger on the pulse of how to do a set list.
Yeah.
But it was a good second track, I think, for those concerts. Didn't chart in the United States. I would describe it as like a solid album track. I'm kind of surprised that they released it as a single in the UK. I'm interested to know the story behind that. Because there are other candidates on the album. They could have released as singles that might have done a bit better, but it's a pretty good track. And it's not, I wouldn't skip it. So I would just,
Oh God,
this
no.
is one of those albums you put it on, or I put it on, and I just listen to the whole thing all the way through. If I have to go do something else, I press pause, come back, press play, and just listen to the whole thing as a whole.
I think it's the only song on the album, and this is where I think I ended up at a 7 because I do think like it's kind of a what the kids call it's a vibe. This songwriting, you can sort of feel the Pacific Coast Highway at dusk. It's got that
Mhm.
kind of feel to it, right? But I'm not convinced about that false ending. For me, there's something about that,
Yeah.
and then when it comes back, and it's like I think that's just your natural endpoint.
I think false endings in general, I'm just not a fan of.
Yeah,
But as I listen to that, I'm just waiting for it to kick back in because I've heard it so many times
yeah,
the other way. I'm looking at the lyrics here, and how do you interpret this? Her imagination ran wild. Could this really happen to me? She could barely hold back the tears. Everything she had waited for, everything she dared to dream, suddenly was outside her door. But it's too good to be true. So something's like right there that is too good to be true.
I think it's that opportunity that yeah, well, it's that imposter syndrome maybe where, well, I can't be getting this job. Something's got to, the axe is going to fall here, right? The sword of Damocles is hanging over me. Something's going to go wrong. That's the way I interpret that. Yeah.
There was no talk of giving in, and just as hope was wearing thin, her eyes were like a child again, too good to be true. Morning on the outskirts of town, sitting in the traffic alone. You don't know what it means to be free.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Love too, though, there's no rhyme in that last verse. And I like it when artists do that, when they're so confident in, no, this is what the lyric needs to be. That I'm not going to look for a rhyme with free or town or whatever else. That's what it is, and that's where it stands, and it's perfect. Too good to be true, yeah. Was that ever? Yeah, how many times was that one played live? I don't think I wrote that one down.
Probably pretty often. It was on that. I can look at the statistics for this.
48 times, but only on the Into the Great
Yeah,
Wide Open tour. It wasn't played after that. So, yeah.
yeah. It was. I think it was always the second track on that tour.
Yeah, I was looking at that. After you said that, I was like, oh man, then you go straight into the biggest hits of the era, right? So very cool. Okay, next song. Another one I think I might have rated a wee bit low.
You
And
gave it a
again,
9.
I gave it an 8.
Oh, I thought you gave it a 9.
Thought I gave it an 8.
All right.
Uh,
Maybe I was wish casting my score on that.
and that's one of the things I found with doing this pod is when I get to the end and I start thinking about the songs as a whole, and when I've had a lot, because when I'm sitting down and listening to them, I'm really being nerding out and focusing in on, well, do I like that snare sound, and do I like the way that this transition works, and whatever else. And you're not scaling back and listening to it recreationally. Every time I've listened to it in the call since, my God, it's just a rip roaring song, great lyric, great tempo, unrelenting. And it's that sort of, to me, it's like a cousin to Running Down a Dream. It's that same type of tempo and rhythm, and it's got the big solo and whatever else, right? So
Yeah, I mean, this is a banger. This is a classic Tom Petty banger. I was surprised that it wasn't a Mike Campbell thing,
yeah,
although his fingerprints are on it. He wasn't a co-writer. This was Jeff and Tom. But I have a playlist of Tom Petty bangers, and it's like American Girl, Refugee, Jammin' Me, You Wreck Me, Free Girl Now, Out in the Cold, and there's a few others that are
wow,
just like great driving songs
yeah,
and just uh, relentless rockers.
yeah.
I This is a funny one to me because I don't know what is going on with this, with the fans or with streaming or whatever. I think it's criminally understreamed. It's only 1.9 million streams, which is the 7th most on the album. It's the
Wow.
107th most in his catalog. And I would understand that if it was just some album track that never got any radio airplay or anything, but it was number 1 on the US rock chart.
Yeah, I don't get it
Uh,
either.
and it was probably the third biggest song in terms of commercial success on the album chart wise. So, and it's got all the hallmarks of a fan favorite in terms of being just a mega rocker, right?
Yeah,
So very, very unusual to me that this is not more beloved, or at least on more playlists or being streamed more at this point.
I love that spoken word bit in this song too. Standing in the doorway, I'm out walking. That whole bit again, you sort of, and then it just rips back into I'm out in the cold body and soul. So clever, and again, it's almost a little bit. Again, we're talking about sequencing here. Too good to be true. It sort of follows on mood wise. Again, the day fell down, the air got cold. I walked out in the street, daydreamed for a mile or two, staring at my feet like a working boy. That's a great line too. But it's got that same. I just see California in my mind's eye when I'm thinking of this, and you see this dusty road on the outskirts of town. They've got that same feel to them, and that sort of that same kinship that I think again, just sequence wise, absolutely perfect.
Should we take a moment to talk about the album cover?
Yeah, let's do that.
It is, I don't know if you did any research on this. It looks
Yeah,
like it's, and I didn't know what it was from either. This is an unusual artwork
yeah,
for a Petty album, but it looks like it's a slightly cropped painting of autumn landscape by Czech artist Jan Matukla.
Matulka. Yeah.
Interesting. It's just I'm looking at the album cover right now. It's just like for a Petty album, this is extremely unusual. I wonder how they chose this.
Well, I think Tom was and him and Dana, obviously, they were fans of, they bought art. Highway Companion was commissioned. That was a commission piece by one of their favorite artists. This one, I think, it's just slightly abstract. It's got this weird texture and quality to it, but you've got that road leading out past the edge of the scene, right? Which I think that's your Into the Great Wide Open. That's your Gunslingers Leaving. That's where just thematically, I think that really, really fits. And the colors are very sort of autumnal, and so I think there are elements of the image itself that I think work with a lot of the themes in the album for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the painting style and the subject, it looks like it's a little town uh, that you'd be driving through or walking through. Fits with the album as a whole, and with the album title.
Mm-hmm.
I just never did any research on it. I just, whatever, looked at it and was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. It's actually it's owned by it's called Autumn Landscape, and it's owned by the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. So I might
Yeah,
have to go up and check it out.
yeah. If you do that, get a photo, send it to me. I'd love to
Yeah,
see it in situ. And of course, might not be displayed just because it's owned by them. There's
yeah,
lots of stuff that just rotates through, or
that's
you know,
true. I'll probably go up there and it won't be up there. It won't be on display.
the second piece of like an actual pre-existing piece of art that he used after Southern accents, right? So, and I don't, yeah, you know what? As I'm thinking about it, I don't know whether I was ever able to find out whether Tom specifically chose the artwork for either, or whether they were sort of brought and suggested, or whether they were just chosen by the label or whatever. I'm not too sure on exactly how much
Yeah.
control and how much interest he had in some of those things.
Or like, what would be the rights usage of this? I'm just,
Yeah,
it's interesting.
you'd pay a licensing
Pay
fee, right?
license
I mean,
fee.
I think, I mean, well, if the artist is um alive, I think Jan Matulka was, I think he was sort of around the early 1900s, I believe, if I
Yeah,
remember.
I think he died in 72, so
So he would have
he's gone.
been deceased. So then his estate, yeah, or the LA County. I mean, the LA County Museum, depending on what rights they brought from the estate to either just house it or to actually own it, then it might be the museum themselves that you pay to. So yeah.
Now I want to know how much it costs, because can I try to buy this? Just kidding. I don't think I can afford it. How much is it worth? Now I want to know, because what a piece of art that would be to have on your wall.
God almighty, can you imagine? Well, you'd want a bloody good insurance policy on it. And you could do
For
Tom
sure.
Petty fan tours of your house. All right, you and I will meet again, John.
Yes, you
The
gave it a
next album,
7.
but I
So
did
you
give it a
probably
7.
you put this tied with Too Good to Be True as,
Yeah,
and we're not saying it, I mean, it's not saying it's weak. It's
yeah.
just the not your favorites. You also have, I didn't see your Built to Last score as well. So
Yeah.
okay, so those three you have as your least favorite or lowest rated.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Um,
that the three songs. I mean, again, there's some great lyrics in this song. A red-winged hawk is circling, the blacktop stretches out for days.
yeah,
How could I get so close to you and still feel so far away? And one of my listeners actually pointed out that there's a sort of a symbiosis there with American Girl, You know, she was American Girl raised on promises. There's like a little bit of a callback maybe thematically there. I just think that, you know, it's like it's a catchy hook. It's a nice little memorable idea that Tom puts in our heads. But I just think it's, well, as you said, it's a good, solid album track. I don't think it's much more than that for me.
It seemed like reading about this one in the, I think it's the book, Zollo intimated that it was a spiritual or a song about faith and,
Hmm.
losing a loved one and then meeting them again. And you could certainly infer that, especially that line, one day all the rules will bend and you and I will meet again.
Yeah.
And then like, okay, so I went into some other, sites where they talk about lyrics and stuff. I think it's song meanings. Someone said, well, it's about, a relationship that just can't work, but one day they'll meet again. I probably lean towards the former because it does seem a bit overt that this is about, perhaps, well, I don't know. Somewhere on a far off place, I will recognize your face. That also kind of, you could definitely infer that is, you know,
Yeah.
somebody passed away and you see them again
Yeah.
somewhere, someplace.
And it could be a platonic thing, right? It could be an old friend that you just sort of lost
Mhm.
touch with, or and I think I mentioned that yet. But again, it's another fairly open lyric that you can sort of drop yourself into and make yourself the star of the scene, right? Again, it's what he did so well. Yeah, one day all the rules will bend. I love just the sort of the implication there. It could be what rules? You know, it could be the rules of, I think I'd said in the episode something, it could be same-sex marriage, it could be interracial marriage, which was, you know, a problem in centuries of decades past. It could be the universal rules of physics could be bent, and
Yeah.
we could meet someone from a different time. Just again, it's such a great line, but the song itself overall doesn't have the same impact as, you know, Out in the Cold or All the Wrong Reasons or Dock of the Sun. It's not got the extra sauce, the special sauce that those songs have. So, and again, a seven's still well above average. You know,
Yeah,
so I don't really
it's a
feel
good.
bad about giving it a seven. You know,
Yeah, there's some albums don't even have a single seven on it. Everything's
no,
lower. I have wrote down solid album track, no skips on this album, which is what I put for stuff that I don't have a strong feeling about, but I
yeah,
like to listen to it when it comes on. The gorgeous guitar throughout really stood out to me. The harmonies, I like the jamming at the end as well.
yeah.
But again, I wouldn't, put this up towards the top of the songs in the album.
And that, I mean, it does have one thing in it that I'm pretty sure that it's the first time you hear it on a Heartbreakers album is where you get Mike and Benmont sharing a solo, where Mike solos first and then Benmont comes in. I don't think they've done that to this point that I can remember, and they don't do it very often afterwards. So it's got that little bit of uniqueness to it, but yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a good little song.
All right, so making some noise.
Yeah, baby.
Oh, you like this one?
Oh,
You gave
good
it a
lord, yeah,
9. Say it peaked at 30 on the US rock chart, and I guess that would that be just due to airplay?
yeah,
Another Mike Campbell co-writer. It's one of 2 on the album, which is, I don't know if that's low for him. But he always seemed like he had 1 or 2 at a minimum. Unsurprisingly, he has a great guitar riff. And this is one I actually have a funny like personal story about this one. I went to see Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs play the Tom Petty. It wasn't a show for Tom Petty's birthday. I was at the Bellwether, and the show happened to land on Tom Petty's birthday, so he sent out an Instagram post and said that we're going to do a full set of Dirty Knobs tracks, and then we're going to do a set of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers
yeah,
music. And a lot of them were his co-writes. Some of them weren't, but this is one that he played, and I noticed when he played it, I remember that he had not been playing this song on their tour as a cover song or on any of their tours really. So it was
yeah.
one that they kind of brought up out of nowhere, and he screwed up the lyrics. It was the only one that he started messing up, and he looked at his guitarist, his lead guitarist on his left. I don't know his name, but they kind of chuckled, and he was trying to help him because that guy seemed to know all the lyrics for
Yeah.
everything. And he quipped, I knew this was going to happen. And then he just started improvising. So he started making up lyrics on the spot, which worked pretty well, like to
Yeah.
his credit. Um, but Tom said, I think in the book, that this was a fun one to play live, making some noise. I mean, it is kind of like we're a rowdy band type song, and it definitely fits within what Mike brought to the band in terms of his songwriting and the songs that he was co-credited for all have the same sort of vein to them
Yeah.
that ended up becoming Heartbreaker songs. So that was a funny moment at that show.
We talk about that though. That's why you go to see live music. A band that just plays the songs exactly as they are on the album will just sit home and listen to the album, save the money. You don't get beer spilled on you and have to deal with crowds. Just listen to the album. I want to go and see a performance. And when stuff like that happens and the band just deals with it and they laugh about it, those are the moments you remember, right? Those are the stories. Those are the anecdotes you bring up on podcasts.
Yeah, and he even brought out he brought three guitars to the show that he had played on the first three albums and used those guitars on some of the
Yeah.
songs that he was playing through. And there was I don't know if it was a Rickenbacker or it was something, and it was so heavy that he's just like he like halfway through the song put it down and got another guitar from his roadie because it was just so
Yeah.
gargantuan that he didn't want to carry it anymore and play it. So that was cool to see those guitars that were so instrumental to their early success.
And super cool that he still got them too, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because I know he sold off quite a lot of his collection, but those ones from those early albums, I'll bet you they'll never leave the Campbell family, right? Because they're part
Yeah,
of rock and
for
roll
sure.
history, and
Too
you got
too
to keep those.
important. Yeah.
You talked about so like two co-writes on this album, and that did vary. There were some albums, I think Let Me Up had quite a few co-writes, and there's different levels of that.
Yeah, I would say these. I'm looking at the lyrics. It's not. I guess it is. I wouldn't say it's super deep, but it's about a guy. It sounds like he's about a musician
Yeah,
and telling a little story, and but it's just about rocking out. It seems like, and he's also mentions this canyon story where
yeah,
I was Laurel Canyon or where were they at? Where maybe I don't think it was Laurel Canyon. Maybe it was. But he was playing his guitar, and then he could hear somebody across the canyon start playing guitar as well, and you could almost hear the canyons were set up in such a way that you could almost hear a full conversation
yeah.
if you're listening carefully. But he says here, from across a canyon, a guitar plays through an amplifier on a long delay. It was an old melody. I recognized the song. I had an amplifier too, so I played along.
I just love that, and I love that choice of because you could say I had a guitar too, right? Would
Yeah.
work totally would
I
work.
had an amplifier too.
But Amplifier 2 is just so much funnier and so much quirkier and more distinct and unique. I love it, man. I just think that's such a great line. And then, it's about working musicians to me. It's about, you just gotta keep working. You gotta get down there. And then when you do get up there on stage, look at me, mama, I'm making some noise. And I like that making some noise, meaning playing loud rock music. I gave it a 9 because it just this I love rock and roll, man. I love it. I know you do too. And when that opening lick kicks in, I'm thrown back to the Beatles for Sale. I'm thrown back to the Rolling Stones. I'm thrown back to the Kinks. All those rock bands that I listened to when I was a kid that infected me and sort of cemented this lifelong love of this type of music. This song just encapsulates that for me. I love it.
Yeah, and I believe that they often closed
Yeah,
show closer 30 times out of the 50 set list that we have for that tour. They used this as the show closer. Another 13 times they used it as the main set closer. So they
yeah.
definitely felt like this was a strong one to finish either the set or the show on.
When it's where I commented in the episode that again, my only slight thing that I was like, I don't want to fade out on this song. I want a big rock ending. Of course, you don't always put those on albums, but they definitely could have ended this one. They could have done something with it. But it makes sense to do as the big rock ending, the big and Stan going nuts on the drums, and then bang out, you're done. Right? It does
There
work.
should be let's see that live version I have of the Oakland show.
Yeah, it's on the Take the Highway.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back and listen to that and see how they ended that song.
Oh, it's epic, man. It's epic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so
All
good. You're going to
right.
enjoy it. Yeah. Yeah, I really wish they would. That's one thing I think, the estate going back through and looking at different things that they can release, like an upscaled version of the video released, on streaming or on DVD or a Blu-ray or something. And then I'd love to have this on vinyl because it's a
Yeah.
brilliant, brilliant live performance.
Yeah, I don't know like I wonder how profitable it is to go back and release stuff
Yeah.
like that. I mean, I guess you could it just depends on sales, I guess. Like what
Yeah.
is the demand for a show like that live?
I mean, among the hardcore,
Yeah.
I think we're
I
pretty
mean,
high.
it's there.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, if we think about it, the Fillmore release and the Wallflowers and all the rest, those are for hardcore fans. You're not buying either of those things if you're a casual Tom Petty fan, right? Really, you know?
Probably not. All right, Built to Last.
Yeah,
You gave this a 7.
give it a 7. Yeah. Um, I think it's another one of those sort of good album track. It's an odd song, right? Like it's a different, very different thing. And Tom said that they had a lot of trouble finding the rhythm for it because it just wasn't working. It doesn't work with a straight backbeat. You can't really you can't swing it on the three. There's a lot of things you can't do with it. So getting into this sort of, someone said working in a coal mine, it's got that same type of rhythm to it. It when that happens, and as soon as you get the rhythm, it's like, yeah, there we go. Now we can actually get someone with this song because now we've got the right feel to it. Built to Last, I think it's a good little sentiment to finish the album. I think, maybe it's like, I'd said maybe he's at that point in his marriage to Jane where things are really, I mean, they're not falling apart. They're pretty much fallen apart by this point, right? And he knows that it's really just a matter of time now, but it's almost that sort of that last kind of I'm gonna say this, and maybe if I say this and say it out loud, it'll make things better, and maybe it'll get me over that hump. And then again, it could be a statement about the band as well. We were built to last. Okay, we're coming back in now. I'm working with Jeff Lynne. I know you guys aren't happy, but we're a band. Like we're a band, and I care about the band, and I want to be a part of a band, and maybe it's that thing's coming through too.
It's an interesting choice as the album closer. I like it. I like the track generally. What's funny is that Tom was quoted as saying, "I don't know if I really like that one,"
Yeah,
in the book, and he said it was the only song on the album that he wrote while the sessions were going on. I think
yeah.
when they got it done, that was like a big. I think maybe they just wanted 12 songs, and when they got it done, it was a big relief. Is this the one where you thought maybe it was from the garage,
100%.
or was
I'd be amazed
okay?
if this wasn't because it feels like, and I also kind of went further and said I think it's probably just Mike, Tom, and Jeff. I think because I don't think that that's how we play in the bass. It sounds like Jeff Lynne playing that bass line to me. There's no, I mean, there's no kick on it. There's no kick drum, right? So you've got those toms, and whether it's a snare or hand claps, I can't really quite tell either. So the percussion, Jeff Lynne's credited with percussion on the album. Mike and Jeff and Howie are all credited with bass. It wouldn't surprise me if this was one that Tom had hanging around and someone came up with that. They're mixing something else or they're hanging around in the garage and they're talking about what they're going to do. And then this song grows naturally and the three of them just knock it out and get it done. And it's got that late night feel to it. Just in my mind, that's where this song was born out of. And I don't know if that's true, but obviously, but
It would be interesting to also hear this album with Making Some Noise as the closer, but with a big rock finish.
yeah,
Uh, as opposed to adding Built to Last here at the end. That'd be something interesting to play with, but we don't have access to a Making Some Noise with a big rock finish unless we use the live version of it. But
yeah,
because if you think about them using it on the tour as the album closer, Making Some Noise, that would make it a likely good album closer as well. But I like Built to Last. I think
yeah.
it does feel to me like it's tagged on, but it's a good song.
But and this is where when I'm drawing comparisons and when I sort of make my assertion that I think it's a stronger album than Full Moon Fever in some ways, that it's not tacked on in the same way that Zombie Zoo is, right? Because Zombie Zoo it's a throwaway song. I mean, it's a fun, upbeat, poppy little thing, but it's just something that Tom wrote. It's a silly, frivolous thing. Where I don't think this one is quite that. It's again, it's a 7 for me. It's sort of in that bracket of those second tier or third tier songs on the album, but it's not frivolous. Like it does actually have. There's a little bit of weight to the lyric, I think.
Zombie Zoo is, well, I guess you have your theory about that. Zombie Zoo is well liked. It's up there in terms of the streaming, surprisingly high.
Yeah, I know.
Given and you have your theories that, I'll just throw on Zombie Zoo, or
Yeah,
maybe it's added to all the Halloween playlists on Spotify, and that's why it gets played.
there you go. Too. I mean, so we sort of said, I think offline there that we both feel that this album is sequenced phenomenally. And one of the things we usually do on these episodes is we go through and we try and sort of say, well, if I was sequenced with this is maybe what I would do. There aren't any additional songs. There's not really anything to change other than there is that conversation, like you say, around, well, if you flip Built to Last and Making Some Noise, does that make it more of a natural end on Making Some Noise with a big finish? Because like if you just fade out, I don't think it does quite. I think the fade out on this one actually works because it goes back to just that tom and the bass line, and then you've got that sort of Built to Last. It sort of decays out into the Great Wide Open. So in that way, it's like, yeah, I think it probably is the natural ending point. If you were to switch it though, if you were to put Making Some Noise last, where would you put Built to Last? Would you precede it? Would you just put it in the 11th spot?
Well, if it just went to the 11th spot, it would come after You and I Will Meet Again, which is an interesting pairing,
Mm-hmm.
lyrically, thematically.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a listen.
Yeah, I don't like this is I said before we got on that I don't have a producer of the day sequencing for this because I think they just did a really good job.
Yeah.
Um, with the sequencing, like I just wouldn't change anything. Just this conversation has sparked that question. Making Some Noise, would that work better as the closer? But I think this, I think I would need I don't know. I think I would need a big rock finish
Yeah.
for
Well,
that to be the closer. But maybe you said the fading out into the Great Wide Open might work as well. If Making Some Noise was the closer.
uh,
Or did
well,
I misunderstand?
I was talking about Built to Last. I think that the fade out on that song,
Oh,
it's sort of the song fades out into the Great Wide Open, right? So I think that in the scope of the album, in the context of the album, I think it does work if you want to think about it in that mind and overthink about it, which I always bloody do. What I might do is I'll dig around on because I can split the tracks with my AI that I use, and I'll see if I can figure out some way to end Making Some Noise rather than have it fade out, and I'll send it to you in a little playlist, and we'll see what it sounds like.
that'd be interesting to see. That's the only question I have is maybe would that be better as the closer? And then You and I meet again and Built to Last might work together as well, but it also might be, I don't know,
It might be too much of a
interesting.
muchness
Yeah.
potentially, but yeah,
But overall, this album, I think the one thing we haven't touched on, which was controversial, is not that you think this is necessarily a better album than Full Moon Fever, although it does sound like you believe that. But you also, and I respect that. I would put Full Moon Fever ahead of it just because the highs are so high, and even
yeah,
the album tracks, there's so many of them on Full Moon Fever that I love, and what Full Moon Fever means to me personally.
yeah,
I would put it ahead. But you have an assertion, and I'll just introduce it and you explain it. But
okay.
you don't think that Full Moon Fever is the second chapter. You think that this is the second chapter of Petty's career.
I think this kicks it off. Yeah. So I've been trying to form it because I knew this was going to come up because we talked about it a little bit offline, but there's something in the lyric writing, the way he writes the lyrics on this album, that just it changes from Full Moon Fever. And it's not to say that, I mean, there's some bloody brilliant lyrics on Full Moon Fever, but the consistency with which he seems to be sort of being more, I don't know if it's whether it's introspective or whether it's there's a bigger intentionality in the lyrics in this album that I find than there is in Full Moon Fever. Full Moon Fever is a collection of songs. It's a collection of great songs, but this feels like a statement. This feels like a direction now to take his songwriting in for the rest of his career. And Full Moon Fever is almost like I've had a shit ton of fun with Jeff Lynne. So let's draw that all to a close. We'll do this album. I'll write all these songs with Jeff, and which was, it was a very loose, ad hoc kind of way they went about that. And they just sat down and wrote songs almost in the way that the Wilburys did. Whereas, like I said, this one, if you think about the albums that follow now, Wildflowers, Last DJ, Echo, Mojo, there's an intentionality behind all of those. And there's a very specific thing that each of those albums is trying to do. And she's the one's kind of the outlier there because obviously that's a soundtrack album and it's just a little bit different. But that to me, it's just that change in I'm going to write an album and it's going to be a specific thing on its own. And then again, I just think the lyrics on this album are just that next step on from anything he did before. So that's where I was coming from with that idea.
I would agree that the lyrics are more advanced,
Yeah,
and it seems like there's more depth to them from a macro standpoint. But musically, Full Moon Fever and Into the Great Wide Open are so close, or
yeah,
they're
for sure.
very similar. And you said it yourself that this was an extension of Full Moon Fever in terms of having Jeff. This worked well with Jeff. Let's bring Jeff in with the band. And so to me, after Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, I think the band was at a bit of a crossroads.
Hmm.
And that is a very, to me, thick line because all of a sudden Tom does a solo album, which is something new. Tom is now working with Jeff Lynne, which is something new. Tom is off with the Wilburys, which is something new. So there's this whole span of time where the Heartbreakers are going, are we still a band?
Yeah.
I think that had creeped up into, they talk about it. And he always said, I was always coming back, but I wanted to do this. I think things had gotten, for him, a bit stale or a bit repetitive or a bit something, because Let Me Up I Had Enough wasn't a monster hit or a big hit for him. I think they were, they weren't reaching the highs of Damn the Torpedoes or Hard Promises.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to shift gears. So I think that starting point for the chapter 2 is Full Moon Fever. I do agree that there are developments happening within the chapter that are a big step forward.
Yeah.
But as I said to you in the DMs there, I completely disagree with the fact that this would be the start of the second chapter. That's fine, right?
Absolutely,
We can
of course,
agree to disagree. I just think there's too many similarities between Full Moon Fever and The Great Wide Open to put them in separate chapters in his book.
I suppose then you could almost think of you could think of it in 3 chapters. Then you could think of verse, bridge, chorus, and maybe this is the bridge. Maybe Full Moon Fever and Into the Great Wide Open of the bridge, right? Because Let Me Up I've Had Enough was almost Tom getting that whole period out of his system and just completely, not working with the producer, literally just getting in the room and sometimes writing the songs on the floor as they're recording them. So maybe maybe there's an endpoint there as well, right? So I don't know. Like I said, to me it was more about the lyrics, and it's more just about that cohesiveness. But I totally understand and respect your position too, John.
Well, I mean, I think you're going to reflect on this and then end up agreeing with me. But I also look at like Let Me Up I Had Enough went gold. Southern Accents went platinum. Long After Dark was gold. Hard Promises was platinum. Damn the Torpedoes was 3 times platinum. So I'm working backwards here. Yeah. And it just seemed to me that after Let Me Up I Had Enough, there was a danger, and a lot of lesser artists would have just turned into a nostalgic act or a nostalgia act and just tour those 17 greatest hits that he had prior to Full Moon Fever, never write another great album, never reach the success that they reached with Damn the Torpedoes.
Yeah.
And a lot of bands did, like, that happened to a lot of bands. And instead, a revitalized Tom went to do a solo album and just destroyed that storyline. Like, that was never, once Full Moon Fever came out, that was over. Yeah. Like, that was never a concern that he was going to fade into obscurity. And then obviously Into the Great Wide Open, Mary Jane's Last Dance. I mean, he's writing these in his 40s. Yeah. Wildflowers in his 40s, when most bands or most artists are just scrambling, trying to recapture the magic. So really, like, this point in time, Full Moon Fever, Into the Great Wide Open, just that pivot point where he could have gone into oblivion, but turned into arguably the greatest songwriter in American history.
Agreed. And I mean, what we should do is we'll put this out to the listeners, and we'll ask people's opinions, because I know we've got a few listeners who think deeply about these things, as do we, and I'm pretty sure they'll all agree with you, but that's okay. Maybe what I have to do is sit down and actually, because when you're trying to explain it out loud, I like writing with that kind of stuff, because then I can actually sit back and think, okay, is that actually cohesive what I'm thinking? And sometimes when I write, I think, oh yeah, no, I'm wrong. So
Well, I think what you're saying is true. I don't think that the lyrics taking it a step forward necessarily indicates a new chapter when the music is there as as our other evidence. And then I do think also the lyrics on Full Moon Fever are significantly better than Let Me Up I've Had Enough. And certainly both Full Moon Fever and Into the Great Wide Open are much more cohesive albums than Southern Accents.
Yeah.
So I just think that maybe Into the Great Wide Open was more refined in terms of its album scope.
Right.
And then definitely more depth with the lyrics. But I don't think, I just disagree with your assertion. But the good thing about this is that you are a contrarian thinker, but you don't get upset or freak out when there's pushback. Life's too short.
Yeah, man, I'm 50 years old. I haven't got time to be getting upset with people who I like. Like, what's the point of that? I've probably got 30 years max left, right? So,
you're in Canada, I'm in California. We're talking about Tom Petty. We both love the music, and we get to do this every few months. And next up is a greatest hits episode.
Absolutely, fairly shortly because we've only got. I mean, and what we're going to do, I think, or John, is we're going to throw Peace in LA into that cycle because it was released, I think,
Okay.
'92, right? So it's kind of in that same. It's in that same cycle. It's between Integrate Wide Open and Wildflowers, and I did want to cover it, and I didn't really want to do a standalone. So yeah, we'll do a brief bonus season on man Mary Jane's Last Dance on a Greatest Hits album was a new song. It's insane.
Are you going to do something in the air as well?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was recorded. It's on an album because we did, feel a
Yeah.
whole lot better. He didn't write feel a
Yep.
whole lot better, but we did that one. So I think we sort of have to. So
I think we need to, for the greatest hits, come back with our own, how, if the producer of the day, how would we
absolutely,
change it? And there are some definite discussions there. He is just, there's like, there may be 15 or 13 or 15 that have to be on.
yeah,
And then there's like 5 to 8 where you're like, ooh, like you could really, depending on what part of his discography you want to feature, you could really make the case for 8 more songs,
yeah.
which is fine in the age of playlists. But I think back to, what was it, 93, and like, here's a
See,
snapshot.
yeah, and I
And then
think
Something in the Air is taking up, like, you could just have released Mary Jane's Last Dance,
yeah,
but Something in the Air is taking up a spot on
yeah.
Tom Petty's first greatest hits disc. So
Absolutely. And
let's,
it's
we got
knocking off Jamming Me and it's knocking off Insider and it's knocking off, songs that arguably should be on there. So I think what we're gonna have to do, and we'll do this offline so we don't bore people, we'll have to come up with some criteria here. And I think
yeah,
the physical media format is one of them because we're talking about songs, and I like doing that anyway, because it forces you to be a little bit more um critical and sort of a bit more cutthroat. But so we'll have to do CD or double album. And if we go double vinyl and CD, then you got to think about the sequencing might have to be different because then you've got constraints on time on double vinyl, right? So we'll figure all that out. Double
all right.
vinyl, just as a sign up, will give you more, right? You've got more time. You'll be able to get more songs on double vinyl than you would on a CD. Just
It just was such a, I guess is the word, ubiquitous CD in college. Like every
yeah,
party, or I heard it at every party I went to. They just put on, like, that was one of those. Well, we'll get into it, but that was one of those, as a preview. That's one of those greatest hits, maybe one of the greatest hits of all time. Certainly at that point in his career,
yeah,
you just put it on. There is not a bad song on there.
yeah.
So it's just banger after banger.
For me, it's the same as Queen's Greatest Hits, and it's the same as the Rolling Stones 67 to 74, whatever that one is. It's just there's no fat on this. The hell are we gonna apart? And again, we're gonna talk about something there, and we'll get to it. But yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. And that's one I've been looking forward to for a long time because I know that one's gonna be because we talk about sequencing. Do you sequence them chronologically, like they done Greatest Hits, or do you try to sequence so they're thematic, or do you mix up the tempo and bring things up and slow them down? It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll hold my thoughts on that for that episode.
Okay, I'll wrap things up here because I don't think we have anything else to cover. I think we got off my controversial thing. We
So
did the singles.
here, just
Yeah.
so where does this album, just to wrap this up, where does Into the Great Wide Open fit right now for you, rankings wise, in his discography?
Oh, on the spot, I think I'm still gonna pretty much always put Wildflowers one. I'm probably always gonna put Hard Promises at two, just because I love that album so much. Then it's gonna be a toss up between Torpedoes and Full Moon Fever, and possibly Mojo because I love that album as well. You know what? I'll I'll say I'll number four. I'll put it in four spot. What I'm listening to right now and what I enjoy right now, it's for nudging into three. Just because I've really enjoyed this album so much from doing this season. Um, it's an album like I said. There's not even close to a skipper on it for me. When I throw on
Yeah.
the vinyl when I'm listening to vinyl on weekends, it's every single song I love. I've got such an appreciation for the band as always and Tom's songwriting. So let's go four. Let's say four for me right now, as of today.
And I think I'm just looking at the list of albums here, and I like Damn the Torpedoes, but I don't think it's as cohesive of an album as this.
No, nowhere
And
near.
I
No.
would be much more likely to put on Great Wide Open than that. And
Yeah.
certainly I like Hard Promises, but not to the extent that you do. So I think I would put it third after
Right.
Wildflowers, which is now my first because I'm a 50-year-old man. I think it's first again now, or it is now. Full Moon Fever at 2, and then Into the Great Wide Open, I believe, at 3 at this
Yeah.
point.
But that raises an interesting point too, though, right? Because are you wanting to listen to a collection of great songs, or you want to listen to a great album? Because if I'm want to listen to a really cohesive album, I don't think he ever topped, Mojo and Wildflowers. I mean, Mojo's just one of the best albums ever recorded in terms of the way it was done, how cohesive that album is in terms of sonics, in terms of the feel of it. It all sounds like it fits together. If you want to talk about concepts, well, The Last DJ is superb because it tells this story of like it's got this theme. It's tough, man. It's really tough ranking things with Petty because he's so good. He's so consistent.
It's a good problem to have.
Absolutely. It's like when you're Jurgen Klopp and your subs are better than Man United starters. It's a good problem to have for a game, right?
I'm glad you admitted that. That's good.
Hey, I love my team. I just they're deeply flawed and broken at the moment. So, and as much as it pains me to admit it, yours bloody well isn't, and I don't
Well,
like it. I don't like it,
they
John.
they just lost 3-1 to Arsenal.
Yeah,
So
you're gonna get a few losses here
I'm a
and there.
little I'm a little worried. A little worried. Got
Yeah,
to get Salah back.
I mean, City have got Haaland and De Bruyne back. That's never good for anyone. So,
Right.
you know, okay, well, we'll leave it there, and we'll because we're going to be getting together again, as you said, really soon to talk about the three songs in the gap between the until Wildflowers. But until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about Tom Petty. I'm not exactly sure what the next episode is going to be yet, so it'll be a nice surprise for me and you. Bye bye.